Welcome to this Google Hangout regarding security, sustainability in the 21st century public or private enterprise. My name is Arthur Smith, and I look forward to facilitating our discussion on this topic today. A few housekeeping items. We are monitoring the chat, which you can access if you have logged in with a Gmail account. Please feel free to post any questions during the session, and we will try to address all that we can. The format will be 3 short presentations and then open discussion among the 3 participants and the audience at large via questions in the chat. The purpose of this Google Hangout is to discuss national security, information security, and more recently health security as some major security concerns that are receiving national and global attention. Economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, corporate sustainability, and social concerns such as healthcare, poverty, crime, and education are also receiving security concerns as well. Today, we are examining this topic from a number of different perspectives. We have 3 people joining us today. General Michael Lehnert, welcome.
Thank you.
He's retired, Major General, I should say, and with he's retired with the was with the United States Marine Corps. He's most notable for his role at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. He was originally placed in charge of 13 refugee camps in 2002. He oversaw its transformation into a detention facility for suspected members of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Disagreeing with the tactics used there, he has publicly expressed his opinion that the facility needs to be shut down. The general left Guantanamo Bay in 2003 and deployed to the CENTCOM theater and took part in Operation Iraqi Freedom, where he served as commander for Marine Logistics Command. He returned to the United States in 2005 and assumed command of the Marine Corps Installations West. His many decorations include the Defense Superior Service Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, Legion and a Defense Meritorious Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. We also have with us Lionel Santiago. Welcome, Lionel. Lionel is Master Police Officer in the Orlando Police Department and is lead faculty for Criminal Justice and Security Management Administration with professional studies here at Southwestern College. He has been with the Orlando Police Department for almost 16 years and has worked a variety of assignments, including criminal investigations and internal affairs. He is currently the department's recruiter. He has a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Central Florida and Master of Arts degree in Homeland Security with an emphasis in security management. And I'm Arthur Smith again. I'm the program director for business and leadership with professional studies here at Southwestern College. Prior to higher education, I've held a variety of leadership and management roles in or serving behavioral health care and human services organizations spanning 27 years. I've held faculty and academic leadership roles during the last 10 years. I have an MS in management from Friends University and a BA in sociology and anthropology from Earlham College. So Mike, what are your thoughts about national security and law enforcement today?
Okay, thank you very much. I've been asked to start out first to address the national security and law enforcement issues at the national level. I'm going to keep my remarks general, but I'll be happy to take questions during the open discussion period. You know, the events of 11 September 2001 changed our country and the way that American citizens live today. The unprovoked attacks on the icons of American power and the deaths of over 3,000 innocent victims is firmly etched in the minds of every adult citizen today. I'm going to offer a bit of a contrarian view than the one normally offered by administration officials and political leaders of both sides, because as tragic as the events of that day were, we also need to ask ourselves if we aren't playing into the terrorists' hands by our actions. The objective of terrorists is to change what we believe and what we think is important. Terrorist acts are by design planned and executed to elicit a response and to gain popular support for a cause. The day after 9/11, we had the support of the world. In the 13 years after that sad event, the support eroded, and it eroded rapidly. How did that happen? Before I answer that question, I want to address the dangers we face today. Since 9/11, law enforcement, national military intelligence, and our military and other government agencies have become significantly better at sharing vital information and preventing domestic acts of terrorism. How good are they? Well, According to a recent Washington Post report and confirmed by a study in The Economist, your chances of dying in a terrorist attack in the next year are 1 in 20 million. Or said another way, in accounting for a life expectancy of 80 years, your chances of dying in a terrorist attack in the U.S. in any given year are about 1 in 250,000. To put this in perspective, your chances of dying by assault by firearm wielded by an American are 1 in 340. Now, I'm not trying to say that terrorism isn't a threat. It is. I'm saying that our law enforcement professionals and our government agencies have done a good job ensuring that terrorism occurs largely away from our shores. So what was the cost of achieving the level of security we enjoy today? First was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the growth of agencies within that organization. After I retired, I was asked to serve as the senior advisor for the Commissioner for Customs and Border Protection. Just as a single data point, in 1992, the U.S. Border Patrol strength was 4,139. By April 2011, that number had grown to 20,745 Border Patrol agents and an increase of 18% during alone. This does not include the over 20,000 personnel in the Office of Field Operations, who most of you would probably think of as Customs. And they're responsible for the security at legal ports of entry, including all international airports, seaports, and legal border crossings. The burden cost of paying and training and equipping each of these agents is about $174,000 per agent. Now, you can multiply that by about 40,000 and do your own math. So when you hear politicians talk about securing the border and balancing the budget in the same breath, please check their math. There is no such thing as a free lunch. In general, these agents do a very good job moving about 965,000 legal passengers and pedestrians through legal border crossings each day of the year, as well as 47,000 truck, rail, and sea containers, and about 258,000 incoming and outgoing privately owned vehicles. Each of these daily events is a separate vulnerability. But at the same time, the movement needs to be as non-invasive as possible for the law-abiding citizen. They make about arrests are made each day. At the same time, trade has to be facilitated. We're a global economy. The annual trade moving through our ports of entry is about $2 trillion a year. That's trillion with a T. Additionally, there's an added value of about $94 billion in international tourism. So the objective is to keep the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. There are other costs associated with our demand for maximum possible security within our nation, and that is the loss of individual privacy and rights. The amount of data kept on each individual is mind-boggling. For some, this is an issue of little concern. For others, it's a cause for alarm. For those who have confidence that both the private and the public sector will use this data only for legitimate and necessary purposes, the response is, who, me worry? For those who have less trust in the motives of our leaders in the private sectors, there is calls to curb the continuous collection of personal information. So as we get into this dialogue today, we have to ask ourselves the following questions. Are we willing to pay for a zero tolerance of terrorism on our shore? And can that even be achieved? Can we afford the price tag both in terms of dollars and in loss of civil liberties? Said another way, is there an acceptable level of risk? Another question is, what obstacles still exist that limit information sharing, particularly between intelligence organizations and law enforcement? Should all of these obstacles be removed, or were some put in place for very good reasons? Is there an opportunity for a nuanced national dialogue about the relationship between security and civil liberties? Are there opportunities for better cooperation between the analysts who work at the national level and local authorities that might help to anticipate threats likely to affect homeland security? We're going to hear more about that from a local law enforcement official, and maybe we can have that dialogue. Is the terrorism nomenclature developed over the past decade appropriate for future threats? Do the ways that we categorize terrorist organizations limit our vision and cause us to overestimate some organizations? For example, the two most active domestic terrorist organizations in the United States since 2001 are the Earth Liberation Front and Animal Liberation Front. They have been responsible for 84 attacks within the United States, but they've killed no one. They mostly set fire to facilities. On the other hand, Al-Qaeda has only had 4 attacks on U.S. soil. All occurred on 9/11, but they killed 2,996 people. Yet in much analysis of terrorist activity, each attack is given equal more nuanced ways to think about these issues. For example, should we create new ways to categorize the threat that could improve the ability to detect intersections among cyber criminals, organized crime, narco traffickers, and terrorists? Because there are intersections. We need more alternative analysis and more frequent interaction between the strategic analysts in Washington and local authorities. This might help us in anticipating the kind of threats that are likely to affect homeland security. Washington's tendency fault finding rather than improving performance are counterproductive. We need a more results-oriented dialogue. We need better investigative cooperation with state and local entities, and we think that that might be able to be achieved by determining why the relationships between the Joint Terrorism Task Forces and local police are limited, and removing unnecessary obstacles that prevent consistent and quality cooperation between them. Privacy and civil liberties protections must be at the forefront in rethinking relationships and breaking down barriers between the intelligence community and agencies. We need to strike a balance between security and liberty. We also need to put in place smart security measures that don't put a stranglehold on trade. Security at the price of economic competitiveness is not an option unless we are willing to accept a much lower standard of living. So I'll close by circling back to the objectives of terrorists. They want to change our behavior, to make us live in fear. And when we change behavior to the point that it significantly circumscribes our personal liberties, they have won. Thank you.
Thank you, General. I'd like to piggyback on your very well said comment, sir. We need to have that dialogue. And when I think about the young people coming up nowadays and how we are so open to put our lives out there for everyone's consumption on perhaps Facebook or social media, any type of Instagram and Twitter and so forth. We're very willing to do that. However, we perhaps have some apprehension when perhaps some intrusion of some of our liberties, if you will, it's done from a government side of things. And we're going to talk a little bit about that on Wednesday, tomorrow during our panel in intelligence-led policing. I will touch upon some of those issues, but I think that is definitely a conversation that needs to happen in this country. The conversation of how much security are we willing to accept, and that there are costs to that security. I think in a nutshell, I strongly feel that the Constitution of this great nation is supreme. It should always be supreme. We should never go to a place where we start chipping away at the seams. If we start taking the little strings, if you will, that will be the beginning, the catalyst, if you will, of a place where we don't want to go. And I feel very, very, very strongly about that. And we'll talk a little bit more about those issues in tomorrow's discussion. From a sustainability point of view, law enforcement and security, there's a lot of things going on that we need to do a better job in law enforcement. Is we need to think more like a business, and that it is good business to be environmentally friendly. It is good business to build sustainable communities. What is our role in building sustainable communities? And one of the things that I seen, and especially in some of these bigger cities where there is uncontrolled development, we are not having a discussion about, okay, what is that uncontrolled development is going to have on your first responders, on your fire, on your police resources, on your EMS, on your water resources, and so forth. And that is a discussion that needs to happen. I think that we are going to a place where it is almost going to be an automatic, where the resources nowadays are limited in the sense that you just cannot build apartment complexes that not have some way roads to get there. How are we going to pay for the extra police officers? How are we going to pay for the extra fire station? That's, $30 or $40 million. We need to have that discussion before we get to building and all these development and so forth. So urban planning, I think, provides an avenue for us to have a very, very good discussion when it comes to law enforcement and how to build sustainable communities as well. And not only that, but if we have uncontrolled growth, now don't get me wrong, we need to have progress. Okay, I'm all about growth. I'm all about expanding the tax base and so forth, but we need to have responsible growth. Because what we need to do in order to grow these sustainable communities, if you just have uncontrolled growth, then what you have is you have some of these nefarious characters moving into some of these communities. You start seeing deterioration because there's not enough resources to upkeep it. So what happens? You start seeing that broken windows theory come into play. And that is when a community suffers. So in order to have a sustainable community, you got to have a community that is just that, sustainable. We have to sustain it from a lifestyle point of view, from a resources point of view, and so forth. Also, there's a lot that law enforcement can do to build sustainable communities, not only from the economic side of things, on the micro, for example. Ford doesn't build a Crown Vic anymore. It's a V8 car. Okay. Now we're seeing cars, police vehicles that are V6s. And I remember when the V6s first came out, Arthur and the general, that the guys were, what are we doing? How come they're getting rid of the V8s? Well, let me tell you, the V6 is just as fast as the V8. But imagine this: imagine a fleet of 1,000 cars. Okay, just on the maintenance and fuel alone, imagine the resources that are saved. Okay, we need to be more responsible. We need to be good stewards of our resources and so forth. From the planning standpoint as well, what is law enforcement doing to be engaged in a community? We need to be engaged in the community, not only from the terrorism aspect, which is good business to do that, but if we're not engaged, then we're not building sustainable community. We need to be engaged, whether it's community-oriented policing, intelligence-led policing, and so forth. We need to invest in those resources where the law enforcement is out there mentoring, is out there in sponsoring some of these community events, and generating that goodwill, and generating hey, the cops are here. We're here to help. What can we help you with? We have a problem. Let's fix it. Let's work on it together. Long gone are the days where law enforcement just drove around police car, just waited for a call. We need to get out of our police cars. We need to engage the community. This is the 21st century. In addition, I want to talk a little bit about crime prevention through environmental design. I think that's CEPTED principles in building some of these communities. How we build some of these communities and how the environment is designed around them. Where are those windows placed in the building? Where those trees are located? Where lighting is used? That makes a difference in building sustainable communities. And CEPTED, and it's a very understood principle in the security and law enforcement disciplines, but I feel like we need to expand it a lot more. I mean, it is such a useful tool, and it works not only with law enforcement, but also from a terrorism standpoint, which is very, very important. We know what terrorists do. They pre-plan, and there's a lot of precursors that are involved. So we need to deter that in ways that are not as overt. So that is also very important. The Orlando Police Department moved into this current headquarters back in 1972. And it's a huge complex right down in the middle of the city of Orlando, where the Orlando Magic just bought the property. They're going to tear down that big building, and we are building a new building within 2 years. We are seeking the LEED certification under the U.S. Green Building Council's leadership in environmentally friendly building. And it is designed with those principles in mind. There are certain things that we can do to be better stewards of our resources.
Thank you, Lionel. Well, following up on the two great discussions here, there's a couple themes I wanted to bring up. One, you speak about globalization and community, but Lionel really emphasizes the community aspect, and that is a good lead into some of the things that I wanted to discuss from a business and social perspective as well. First of all, when we're considering security and sustainability and thinking about it from a business and social perspective, a lot of the dialogue in many cases has been around environmental sustainability. I mean, when we think about sustainability, it's the environment that's out there. But in fact, when we're talking about sustainability, it's applicable to all aspects of our lives. And from a business perspective, one of the trends that is occurring is a dialogue about things such as the triple bottom line, which includes economic performance, social performance, and environmental performance. Or another term that's being used that's similar is a conscious capitalism. But one of the key items in all of that is that business doesn't live in a vacuum. All these different factors affect how well business is doing. And if you're thinking in a long-term perspective, you need to take all those kinds of things into account, because all those areas have some significant disruptive factors, and they affect us socially as well. So for instance, let's look at the economy, disruptive factors. Economic markets, ups and downs, they affect all of us. Trade, all trade sanctions, anything that is inhibiting trade, or as well as things that help trade or foster trade affect us, and affect how well business is doing and how well we do socially. Manufacturing, transportation. So if there is some disruption in any of those or significant changes, it is going to affect us socially, and it's going to affect the business and how well it's doing. Social disruption, ideological differences, diversity. If there's constructive dialogue, acceptance, that it can be very positive. But if it's disruptive, if it is destructive, it certainly leads to other factors that affect our lives socially and from a business perspective. Same thing with political. Constructive dialogue, constructive conflict is good. If it reaches a place where it's destructive, that's where we run into concerns economically, socially, and especially from a business and social perspective. Then we add in the criminal element and the terrorism element, and how disruptive that can be. And also then, of course, acts of war, which is another social disruption factor. Now note, each one of those things affects the economic disruption or the economy. So they're interrelated. We can't ignore the fact that there is those kinds of interrelationships. Environmental disruption. There's going to be natural disasters. I mean, that's not something that we're contributing to. They happen, but they disrupt us socially and economically. But there's also the human-influenced environmental disruption that we do need to attend to, because it does, again, disrupt locally or regionally or nationally or globally the different the society as well as the economy. Then there are the criminal acts and terrorism acts that can affect our environment. And in the Homeland Security literature, I'm especially in the last year to 2 years, seeing the attention to water, to protection of the environment around where pipelines are, and other kinds of things that are of significance. Well, that's very much part of our security, as well as being a matter of sustainability. And then I'm going to add another element that affects our lives, which is not part of those three, the economic, social, and environmental, is the technological disruption. We are very technological dependent in society today. And technology is reaching out to even some of the remotest areas on this earth, and it can be extremely disruptive. So we have to take a look at again what happens when that is disrupted. Maybe it's weather that interrupts, like in my life, interrupts satellite or not satellite, but wireless internet connection. So I have a hard time communicating with others from where I live. I mean those kinds of things happen. But there's also cybercrime and cyber terrorism, and we need to be concerned about those kinds of things as well, because that can completely knock out the basis for how we do things from a business perspective socially, and it gets into our defense and law enforcement and other areas as well. Is that technological disruption? Well, so when we think about it from a security perspective, then, and we think about sustainability, doesn't it make sense in this 21st century for us to, one, embrace that, if you will, the triple bottom line, or those three elements, and understand how they're interrelated, and how that, from a business perspective, it's critical to the success of our organizations in the long term. From a social perspective, it's important. It's critical to the sustaining of our community as individuals and as our environment, and to take all of those into account and think long term. I think to me that's very important. That's something I hold very close to my heart. Many of you will know me as being very strong on the environment, but it's not just the environment. It's social and it's economic as well. There's some challenges that I see in all of this. We can't expect everybody to have the same perspective on those elements. There are still going to be businesses, for instance, that are going to be looking very closely at the economic factor. But that doesn't mean we as a community can't work together. If we have, in my own case, I ran my businesses up until going into higher education as ones that embrace those three areas. It's easy for me to work with another organization that was focused primarily on the economy, or economic aspects, but was looking at green technologies because it made economic sense. Looking at how to improve health benefits for their employees, because it actually would decrease their overall health expense for their employees by having a wellness program. Okay, it was an economic driver there. It certainly met the end result there, certainly met the social and environmental commitment, as well as the economic necessity for the businesses that I work with. So it's a matter of not saying that everybody has to be on the same page. It's a matter of us being able to collaborate and see where we have that common ground, whether it's business, whether it's socially, finding that common ground and work together for the common good. Now, I know that sounds ideal in many respects. I recognize that, and that's not, but it also is, for me personally, that is a vision of where we need to go from a business and social perspective. Okay, we gotta keep going. All right. Yes.
I'm going to try to link some of the things that Art brought up last, in terms of, the idea that we have this. We really live in a global society, but at the same time, as Lionel was pointing out, it really gets down to your community. And I'm going to try to do this by just telling a story, because back when I was on active duty, we were doing some humanitarian work, building in Guyana in South America. And there was a requirement to build a schoolhouse that was 200 miles into the jungle. And it was, the nearest road was about 150 miles. So it was only approachable by a river system and via helicopter. So there we landed, and two small boys came out of the jungle. And one of them was about 8 and the other one was about 11. And the English is spoken in many parts of that particular country. So luckily there was no communications issue. So I tried a test, and you have to understand, this was about 10 years ago, or about 15 years ago actually now. And I said, "Who is Michael Jordan?" The 8-year-old didn't know, but the 11-year-old said, "Oh, American basketball player, very, very good." Now, this is a boy that had never seen a road, but he knew who Michael Jordan was. And I think this really gets to the points that we're trying to make, that we live in a global society, but at the same time, just about everything that we do here has the potential for local, and not just local in our country, but local impacts around the world. And somehow or another, we need to get this right.
I absolutely agree, General. And we live in such an interdependent world where, like you said, General, events in Europe affects the United States. Events in the United States affects China, affects the Far East. Events in the South China Seas can have potential to disrupt the whole entire world economy. And so I think that point is well said. And they are getting back to the debate about sustainability and the efficient use of our resources and so forth. We need to be more, we need to do a better job of conservation. We are seeing now what could potentially be future conflict in the South China Seas, mainly driven by Chinese exploration for further of their resources. Those the ocean up there off the Philippines, very oil rich. They have over about 1.5 billion people, and they have to feed that hungry lion there, if you will. And but we know that structurally they have a lot of issues going on. They have most of their cities are vacant, high pollution. We see some of the damages that can be done to their population when you don't have sustainable growth. And wars have started this way. And I'm very concerned that there's a direct linkage here with how we proceed forward. I'm very concerned about many events in the world going on right now from the community standpoint at the national and international level. But I'm very, very concerned, quite frankly, with what's going on in the South China Seas and the potential that has to cause major worldwide repercussions.
One of the things that Lionel said in his remarks that I really liked, and I'd like to kind of link it to this idea of intelligence and how we do policing in this country. We tend to be technologically driven, and we rely a lot on national sources and this type of thing. But as we look at finding more efficient ways to do business, I really like what is our communities, our populations throughout the country. I think one of the most critical things that we have to do is make sure that the police are not seen as the others, as the enemy, and that the common citizen, I'm a common citizen, by the way, so don't anybody take offense to that, does not see the police force as anything other than an ally. And if we can achieve that in every single community, think about the extraordinary efficiencies in terms of information that we get if these police officers are trained to the point where they get out of their patrol cars, where they communicate and interact in the community. And when the citizens in that community see something wrong and feel very comfortable about bringing it to the attention of our law enforcement professionals. This is what we call in the military a combat multiplier. It keeps our communities safer. It makes the communities and the police on the same team. And I think it's an extraordinarily important thing that we need to think about, because all solutions are not technological solutions. Many of them are human solutions. And I think Lionel brought that up, about how do we build communities instead of compounds? How do we ensure that we can make them as efficient as possible in delivering services to our citizenry, and doing it in such a fashion that, the citizens don't see that additional tax burden, and at the same time, they feel that it's not invasive, but it's there, that they have that comfort and that security to know that their homes are safe, and that their streets are safe, and that their kids can travel to school without fear of being of having incidents along the way and criminal behavior. This is really getting down to the whole issue of true quality of life.
I have to agree with everything that's been said here on the table, and it does start with community, and it starts with us as individuals as well. I think if we want to look at some of the ethics surrounding all of that, if you go back to the root of ethics understanding with Aristotle, and this is going to be a loose paraphrase, but in essence, it's the guidance was to look out for the well-being of others as well as yourself, and it kind of goes along with the idea that we have to take care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of others as well. And so it is watching out for the well-being of of everyone, and then working and then finding a way to address the well-being for all concerned. And so community policing is a great example of that. And I know, Mike, that in many of things, such as with the humanitarian efforts that you've been involved in your service, that you've helped build that well-being as well by reaching out and working with people. So I think those are the common, kind of common principles, at least ones that I find to be very important. So.
Yeah, I'm going to put Lionel on the spot a little bit, and I'm going to ask him a question because he is involved in law enforcement at the local level, and we've got a number of agencies and organizations that collect data, collect information, and I would like his opinion and his thoughts on what we can do better at the national or the state level to improve cooperation at the local level to ensure that the information that you all need to ensure that our communities are safe is provided, and provided in such a fashion that we're not trampling on the civil liberties of our citizens.
That's a great question. And since 9/11, there's been joint terrorism task forces been established, a lot more of those. There's been fusion centers, local fusion centers open. I can tell you without revealing too much information that we have folks in all those areas, and they're very, very active and so forth. But information sharing is key, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about that tomorrow. But from the local standpoint, if a traffic stop is made of a sovereign citizen, for example, somewhere in the 2 counties over, well, that information needs to be shared almost in real time to us through all the municipalities, all the counties in the regional area, because that is it's important information. And 10, 15 years ago, that could have taken several weeks, have not even shared at all. We need to be able to have to set up our systems and much like intelligence-led policing, where that intelligence is shared almost in a seamless, almost in a real-time way, because that gentleman that was just stopped as perhaps a sovereign beliefs or perhaps some other types of beliefs, that information needs to be shared because they could travel through our own jurisdiction, and we need to, for not only for officer safety reasons, but for a lot of different ways. But law enforcement and government in general as a whole, they've always tried to, this is my little kingdom, and I'm going to protect it, and I don't want you to know what's going on because it's my little kingdom. And we 9/11 happened, and a lot of those guys moved through the Orlando International Airport. Well, that wasn't known until after the fact. Okay, we started putting the pieces together that different entities of our government had, and we didn't do that very well. We need to put the pieces of the puzzle together. We need to do a better job of doing that. And much progress has been made, but we need to do better. We need to keep on pushing the envelope and so forth. I will say that in doing some of those things and taking advantage of some of these technologies and intelligence and so forth, I think it's absolutely crucial that we keep an eye on our civil liberties and that we follow the law. Very, very important. We need to be held accountable. We need to hold each other accountable. We need to be, our ethics needs to be paramount in how we conduct ourselves, because what that does, it creates an environment of trust. Okay, it creates an environment of trust, and that is key in 21st century policing, is trust. General, you brought up the point about community-oriented policing, and so did you, Arthur. Now more than ever, we need to get out of our cars and be out there engaged in the community. Now more than ever, for a number of different reasons. But isn't this what public service is all about? Isn't this just at the core of our mission? Is be out there involved in the community? It's much more than just chasing a bad guy. It's much more than that. That's great, and we want to be relentless against crime. But it's about helping that young man that perhaps just got in trouble. Let me point you in this direction. Let me invest some time in making sure that you don't repeat those mistakes. It's about perhaps counseling that young lady who's been a victim of domestic violence. okay, and say, hey, there's some resources here that you can take advantage of. It's about building your community, not just putting bad guys away. It's an investment. And I found out, and I think that, quite frankly, the Orlando Police Department does a great job in doing something. We were very, very involved in the community, and that has paid big dividends in a lot of different ways. And as we preach it, through all our training. So community-oriented policing, intelligence-led policing, 21st century, the security environment demands that the officers be more engaged. We need to be engaged with the community, and they'll be willing to trust us. They'll be willing to trust us. And like the general said, it doesn't need to be this perhaps this adversarial type of a relationship. It needs to be we're in it together to help solve our problems, our law enforcement, our criminal problems, and terrorism. Quite frankly, there's a lot of stuff that goes on that they may be privy to that we may not know of, and that one tip could be that missing piece of the puzzle that may avert perhaps a national catastrophe. So we need to think in those terms.
As I was listening to what you were saying, Lionel, I, if I may digress a little bit into the business arena, I think we as corporate citizens, from a business perspective, we also need to be making that investment. We're a member of the community. Our decisions impact the community. Things that and so that is we need to be partners, along with law enforcement, along with other public organizations, and be partners with individuals in the community to help build that community. Because again, it's a community. If I may, I'd like to shift gears just a little bit and talk about health security. Because health security is, of course, has become a big concern recently with Ebola. As I was listening to you again, Lionel, I was saying, okay, we have this crisis in hand. What's happening as far as the information sharing? How are we geared up, one, for containment? But if we look back historically, what did or didn't we do that might have helped to prevent the situation? And I look at and I have some facts here, which I don't remember right off the top of my head here, so let me take a look. The World Health Organization recently said that more than 4,000 deaths so far from the Ebola crisis. World Bank has said that the economic impact for West Africa, if Ebola spreads to neighboring countries, could exceed $32 billion by the end of 2015. The commander of the U.S. Africa Command, General David M. Rodriguez, estimates the Ebola Commission will cost approximately $750 million within the next 6 months. Look at, those are major. And I can't help but, although you can't really compare the two because this is really an aggressive illness, but I also think about what we learned or maybe didn't learn from AIDS, in that, AIDS at one point was something that was very prevalent in another continent. We didn't pay a lot of attention to it until it became an issue here. Should we have been more proactive about, from a prevention perspective, should we have been more proactive about trying to find a cure for Ebola before now? But as a global community, I'm not saying we nationally, but as a global community, but even more so now that we have this crisis, how are we working together to ensure not only that we're containing the issue, but also that we're addressing the issue from health and well-being of all those who are affected, or our communities, and ensuring that we aren't affected. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I sure do. I think with this Ebola crisis, this is a pay me now or pay me later. And if it's a pay me later, it's going to be much more painful, both in terms of resources and human lives. This is a crisis that's going to require a quick and immediate response. And I have some concerns here. We were talking offline about, who is the Surgeon General of the United States? Well, the answer is we don't have one. He's been nominated a long time ago, but not confirmed. Now, there needs to be a Surgeon General, at least within the United States, acting as the spokesperson and directing our response in support of the administration. We have a military response, and I'm rather proud of the military response that we've seen. But, every problem should not begin with a military response. But the situation is that, if the only tools you have in your toolbox are hammers, every problem is a nail. And that's exactly what we're doing at this time. In terms of Ebola, one of the things that we need right now from our research laboratories is a means of detecting Ebola, so that we don't have individuals moving around and infecting others. This disease can be contained, and while it's tragic that we've lost those that we have, and we're probably going to lose other citizens of the world, it can be contained. But one of the things that we're seeing right now is that one of the best and most complete responses is occurring among the organization known as the Doctors Without Borders. So we're seeing non-state actors getting involved and doing a rather good job, but we're seeing a less dynamic response from national from the national side, from countries throughout the world. The international response is not nearly as dynamic, and so this leads to one of the questions: is the role of the nations being subsumed in this new world that we're seeing developing by non-state actors, international organizations, and is that the right way to go? There's no doubt that Doctors Without Borders is doing a heroic job right now, but they need resources. They need help, and the folks that own those resources tend to be the nations. So we need to somehow figure out how to make this linkage. We need to find a way to ensure that that we have a way to detect this disease. We need a Surgeon General in this country. And we need to make sure that the military response, which I'm really proud of, is integrated into the overall effort.
I'm going to approach this issue from a different side, from the information side, because I think it's absolutely crucial. There's a lot of things that we know and a lot of things that we don't know. And Donald Rumsfeld, General, I'm sure you're familiar with this quote. And I forget what the context he said it, but please understand. He said there's known knowns and known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And I think that is and it's a tongue twister, I know. And I know you're familiar with that, with Secretary Rumsfeld's comments. And I think that applies to in some context to what we're seeing, today. To this day, we don't know how that nurse in Texas contracted the Ebola virus from Mr. Duncan. We've been told that there's a protocol violations. I like to know what those protocol violations are. Personally, that way we can share that information with other hospitals across the nation. And I'm sure by now that we may have some idea. I'm not really sure. I'm not privy to all that information, but information sharing and information is key in this battle. And we need to get that information out as fast as possible, because especially with a deadly disease such as this, information can save people's lives. And we can all take precautions and so forth. And information also shared with the public, reassures the public, whether it's good and bad. We need to get it out there and not hold back, if you will. But from the information sharing standpoint, I think that we need to make sure that we continue to focus on that and get to the bottom of some of these issues. I think it can be contained. It is something that we haven't seen. And in some ways, since we have never seen it before here in this country, even though we've seen it in other countries in Africa and so forth, it's been around for, decades and so forth. But it's new because it's right here, and everybody has their the hairs on the back of their neck, kind of, if you will, standing up. But we're going to learn some things that we didn't know before. And that's okay. Just like we learned some things from national disasters and from 9/11 and so forth, and that's a good thing. But we need to learn these lessons fairly quickly. That's very, very, very important.
One of the things, and I wish I'd gone back and looked this up before our conversation today, but I was listening to a report from NPR a few days ago, and it takes it down to the individual level as far as information is concerned. But I understand that among the community in which Duncan lived in Liberia, their story is that he helped somebody, and that person's parent had denied that person had Ebola, and he helped that person into their apartment, I think. So he gets on the plane, he signs the form, said no, he hasn't been exposed to the Ebola virus. Now, should he have suspected? I don't know. I can't step into that situation. But from the community perspective, the community didn't know until later. So he comes to this country, and it wasn't necessarily that he lied on that form. He may not have known, and yet he came, and that was a hole in our security. As far as, again, been able to detect before the symptoms arise is something that is important. And so I guess that's another piece, is that from an information sharing point of view, is that we really need to make sure we understand the full story. That particular story was quite revealing to me, because Liberia was going to indict him if he survived, and other kinds of things. Well, maybe there was another piece of this puzzle here. In that case, it was public information, possibly. So, well, we're reaching close to the hour here. Is there any last comments? Do you have any last comments, Mike, that you'd like to make? No? Okay. And
I just wanted to touch briefly on this Ebola thing. We've talked about as part of our homeland security strategy after 9/11 and so forth, about various amounts of threats and pandemics and so forth, General and Arthur. Now that now we have some experience here in the U.S. with a virus like Ebola, perhaps it's time now to have perhaps a national discussion on some of these issues about pandemics and so forth, and devote the resources, because now we can see how it crosses borders, and so we need to be, once this virus is contained, which I believe it will be soon, we need to have a debate, and we need to have a very serious debate and actually get something done, which I know sometimes doesn't happen in Congress, but because this is serious business, and perhaps there's an opportunity for us to put partisanship aside and move and do something for the country, and invest in the resources necessary to make sure that we keep our people safe.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Lionel. It was a real pleasure having this time with you. Okay. Mike and Lionel both will be speaking at the Hyatt Regency at 9 a.m. Tomorrow, as part of a law enforcement panel with two other law enforcement officials. I guess 9 a.m. is the start, but 9:30 is actually when the panel begins. And then Mike will be doing a public lecture on terrorism at 6 p.m. at the Hyatt Regency in Wichita tomorrow evening. And then on Thursday is the military. Mike will be doing a military-focused discussion at 11. Yeah, 11 on Thursday at the Holiday Inn in Wichita. Yeah, if you go to ps.secans.edu and follow the news links, you'll be able to see how you can watch online for each one of those events. And we welcome you coming and hope you'll attend. And so, again, thank you to the audience. Thank you again, Mike and Lionel. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation. So, take care.